And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of the Talk podcast. Alongside me, co-host Dan Kiley. Dan, episode 122 of the Talk podcast. There's a little bit of debate whether it is 122. I'm going off of what we had on the show notes. I'm gonna have to go back and check, I guess, the podcast to see what it's at specifically. Dan, before we get into the intro of the show, let me go ahead and take care of some business real quick.
Do it.
Let's do it. Guys, it's football season again. Week 0 is Saturday. There's no place to be, other place to be than over here on the Talk podcast. We'll be live in season every Tuesday, unless otherwise stated like today, at 7:30. Come join us. We're talking Georgia football. Shoot, we might even talk some NFL depending on what we got for Dan's rant. But we're a college football show, specifically Georgia. We focus on Georgia, but we like talking college football, period. So if you want a place to come hang out with us live every Tuesday at 7:30, come do so. We may have additional shows throughout the week. We'll see. Dan and I got to figure out our schedules, and if we can do that, if we can, we will bring more content to you. Dan, hot topic number 1. What coach would you not want to wake up as tomorrow morning?
So for me, this one's pretty easy. And I'm going to attack it from a couple of different angles. It's Billy Napier. Florida is one of those jobs where, despite the fact that we all hate them, it's actually a really good job. And they will not tolerate losing. And, we were kind of having conversations in our group chat the other day. And it's one of those things where Florida could very easily lose 7 or 8 games. But actually be a better team than they were last year. And, what you want out of your coaches, obviously you want to win football games for sure, but you want to get better as a program. And he may be trending in the right direction as far as getting the team better, but he could still lose 7 or 8 games. And that is a world that I would never want to live in, is that you're actually doing your job, but you're going to get fired regardless. And we both know unequivocally, if he loses 7 or 8 games, he's getting fired, because University of Florida cannot and will not tolerate losing 7 or 8 games. Imagine being here at University of Georgia and we replace Kirby Smart and the next guy who loses 7 or 8 games. There's no grace period, because you're the University of Georgia, and vice versa. You're the University of Florida. That's not acceptable in any realm of possibility. So I would hate to be Billy Napier, because I think he's dead man walking. Damn rookie doesn't know how to unmute his mic. Look at this guy.
Damn it. Dude, it feels like it's been a month since we had our show, but it was literally last week. That's how long this week has felt. The last week has felt. Dan, really good answer. Really like the Billy Napier choice. I think he's the popular pick. So let me go maybe second most popular pick. Lincoln Riley, my guy. You've been at USC now going on what? Year 3 at USC, I think it is? Man, if it's been year 3 for Lincoln Riley at USC, time has flown. And I don't think he's going anywhere. He lost his quarterback prodigy in Caleb Williams. Didn't really do anything with him over there. Didn't really do anything with him at OU. Now you have Mason Miller. You still got a bevy of offensive talent, but I don't think you've improved in the trenches. I don't think you've improved on defense. So to me, Dan, feels like clock is ticking. Not to mention, you've gone into a harder conference and you open your season right out of the gate against LSU. Now, say what you want about LSU and Brian Kelly. I think I speak for both of us here. We both have bought stock in Brian Kelly. I think Dan was higher on Brian Kelly coming out of Notre Dame than I was. But Brian Kelly has made a, I guess, believer out of me, if you will. I think Lincoln Riley, I give it 2 years. I give it 2 years, and I don't think he's going to be there anymore. Now, whether that's because he goes to the NFL or he's fired, I don't know. But I'm not buying the Lincoln Riley stock right now. I think it's at an all-time low, in my opinion. So who do I not want to wake up for as tomorrow morning? It's Lincoln Riley. Dan, number 2. Topical conversation here. Topical question, and one I think, I don't know. I think there's multiple. I think this is maybe a divided question depending on your demographic. Is Georgia Tech still a rival for Georgia?
This is a very good question, and it's topical because Georgia Tech opens up their season this Saturday in Ireland against Florida State. So this one's kind of tough for me, and I come from a very different world where I do not hate Georgia Tech. I do love Georgia, but I don't hate Georgia Tech. I knew a lot of people that liked Tech when I first moved here. I was a huge Notre Dame fan coming from Chicago, and Georgia Tech looked like Notre Dame kind of when I was a little kid. So they were kind of like the first team that I really rooted for until I realized that that wasn't probably the best choice in my life. But I don't hate Georgia Tech. And one of the most disappointing things for me is Georgia Tech, in my opinion, is not really a rival right now because a rival has to make it competitive. And Georgia Tech has been so far away from making it competitive that it just doesn't feel like when the game doesn't feel important. Like hell, there was conversation in off seasons the last couple years where a lot of people were debating whether maybe it would be better for Georgia to drop Georgia Tech off the schedule because there was nothing to gain. Now, with the new playoff format, you can keep your schedule however you want to. It's a moot point at this point. But it's one of those things where I kind of hope Georgia Tech does well all season long, so that the game matters at the end of the year. Right? There's skin in the game when we play Georgia Tech that both teams are good and it really matters. And there was a time, believe it or not, Harrison, there was a time when that game was a lot of fun. And there was a time where Georgia Tech had the upper hand. And, I just think the rivalry was in a much better place when that game could go either way. I'm glad that Georgia has, taken control clearly. But it's just not the same. So it may be unfair to say that it's not a rivalry, right? But it's not important.
Yeah, I think it's definitely lost its, I guess, heat, if you will. What's interesting to me, Dan, when I talk to people that are much older than me, even older than you, they always talk about, if they're growing up here in the state of Georgia, they always talk about how a lot of their friends were Tech fans growing up. Like, specifically in the 90s. I think in the 90s, there was as many Tech fans in the world as there's ever been. And that's because Georgia wasn't that great of a program in the 90s. Obviously, Georgia, I guess relatively to now, is probably its furthest down point when you compare it over the last 2 decades. So yeah, meanwhile, Tech won a national championship back then. So is this a rivalry still? I'd venture to say so. I think the game this past year ventures to say it was. Tech played a hell of a game against Georgia. Shout out Buster Faulkner, former Georgia, I guess what was his quality control analyst, whatever his position was. He knew what he was doing, had a tremendous game plan, and really played Georgia tight. Kind of like, rivalry tight in that sense. Like only a rival could play you that well. I think it's a rivalry, but has it lost its luster? I'm with you, Dan. I think it's lost its luster. I'd love to see it come back. That last weekend in November could become every single bit of as special as it once was, because you could have Georgia Tech, Texas A&M, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, the Egg Bowl, damn it, the Egg Bowl, Dan, all in the same weekend. Georgia or Ohio State, Michigan. There's nothing more that I'd love to see if Georgia and Georgia Tech became kind of, I don't want to say 50-50 because I think we'd have a riot in these comments if it was a 50-50 rivalry. But heck, at least have an 8-win Tech team coming into Georgia's house, who is fighting to be undefeated on the year. I think that makes it all the more better. Dan, rant of the week, little NFL talk for the folks, NFL fans, Falcons fans. I think there's a lot of crossover between us. Preseason's wrapping up this weekend. I covered my last preseason game Saturday. Excited to be done with the exhibition and get into the real football. Dan, take it away. What is the rant of the week and how are we feeling about it?
All right, so this may be a new tradition for the Dan's rant of the week, because I'm going to give you a mini rant because something always pisses me off right before I come on, and it's the random computer update where your computer just decides it wants to update, and of course, whenever you have something to do on your computer, it takes forever long. So, yeah, the computer random update. That is Dan's mini rant on that. All right, my real rant of the week. I try so hard to be a Falcons fan. I do. I grew up a Packers and a Bears fan. When I came down here, I decided when I was like 6 or 7 years old that I was just going to make all the local teams my teams. It was easy with the Braves. Just enjoyed it. But the Hawks, they had Dominique. Easy, right? The Falcons have been the hardest one to love forever and ever and amen. And That said, I have never been more disconnected to a team in my entire life than when Arthur Smith was running the football team. I've never been more disconnected. I don't think I watched an entire Falcons game last year, not one. I didn't care. You can ask Harrison, you can ask Jonathan Jeremiah. I would actually get almost ugly to the point where I didn't want to talk. Like Harrison would be like, "Hey, I was looking at the fact." I'm like, I don't want to talk about it. Screw them. So they decided to make a change, a regime change, and I was, for a lack of, I was okay with it, right? I was willing to give it the benefit of the doubt. I'm not crazy about our GM at all. I think he's terrible in the draft. I've gone on record with that, but I'm going to give this draft class the benefit of the doubt and see how it plans out. And Raheem Morris, even though he was a failure the first time he was here and he was a failure in Tampa Bay, I was hoping that he had learned. And that's what my rant of the week is really about, is the Falcons just don't learn. It's like they have amnesia. It's like whatever happened before them, they refuse to look at, and then they're like, hey, we're going to do this like it's brand new. And it's like, and what sparked this is they're not playing Michael Penix in the preseason. They're not playing starters in the preseason. They're acting like the preseason doesn't matter. They said that they've seen enough out of Michael Penix. Are you kidding me? Are you serious? Michael Penix needs to play for 2 reasons and 2 reasons only. One, you might need him. And if you need him to be ready to play. And I don't care if he was good in college. It doesn't matter. We've seen thousands of guys that were good in college that sucked in the NFL, okay? The game is faster than practice. The bullets are flying. You need an opportunity to see him play. Here's the second part. He may not play for a year or 2 years. If Kirk Cousins is everything that we hope and wish and pray that he is, and that we paid him to be, he will not play any meaningful football at all this year. I don't understand what they're doing. And not playing the starters, not in getting these guys ready. They're like, oh, I don't want to get anybody hurt, blah, blah, blah. That's exactly what Arthur Smith did. That's exactly what he did. And they weren't ready to play when the season started. Oh, off the top of my head, it just dawned on me that, I'm just an average person. I'm not really that smart about football, but I know that the 3 games that you're opening up the season with are incredibly difficult. And you are probably going to start 0-3. I hope not, but you're probably going to start 0-3 because your guys aren't going to be ready to play. And you're like, oh, well, blah, blah, blah. No, the good teams take the preseason seriously. The Pittsburgh Steelers, oh, damn, they're not that great. Yeah, well, the Pittsburgh Steelers haven't had a losing season in what, Harrison, 17, 18 seasons?
17.
17 years the Pittsburgh Steelers have not had a losing season. How many times in the history of the Falcons have they had back-to-back winning seasons? 1 time in the history of the franchise have they had back-to-back winning seasons. Thank you, Matt Ryan. Thank you, Mike Smith. Guys, learn from the mistakes. Learn from the great programs. Learn from the great coaches. Learn. Pay attention to what other teams are doing. I understand that there are some coaches who don't play their starters. They may have a culture in place. They may have players in place that they know everything about. You are a brand new head coach trying to implement your system. You have brand new players. You have brought in a lot of different guys that need to mesh and meld. And then you have a very difficult season or start to the season. I just feel like this franchise is doomed because they refuse to learn from other people's mistakes. They refuse to do anything different. Just do something different. And Michael Penix should be playing. He should be playing. Oh, that's it. That's all I got.
That's not as loud as I've heard you get in a long time. The only time you get loud and your audio cuts out is when we get Bama Dan. And we haven't got Bama Dan yet, but by God, I know Bama Dan's coming because football season's here. College football returns this weekend. But before we get into the week 0 action, which can I just go ahead and say, thank you that they've put a semi-interesting game on television for week 0. I loved back a few years ago when they had Miami and Florida play week 0. I'm here for having. Yeah, what's up?
Miami and Florida are playing week 0.
Did I just totally look over that?
Yeah. there's 3 real games, four good games.
I totally looked over that. Yeah, but thank you, Dan. Yeah, I love having actual good games on week 0 because it makes it mean. God, I hate that I'm saying this again. It makes it mean more, Dan. It makes week 0 feel significant rather than just kind of a tune-up preseason game, preseason week. But before we get into that, let's talk Georgia. We got Georgia season predictions on here for you. We didn't really write down much. Now, I did put some things in my show notes in regards to ceiling and floor. I've seen people when talking about ceilings and floors. I get it. You know, when we're talking ceilings and floors, you can go as high as you want to go and you can go as low as you want to go. I'm not here for the whole 8-4 talk as the floor because I just realistically, if we're being realistic, I don't see 4 losses on this schedule. Now, if disasters happen and injuries happen, and by God, Georgia can't field 22 players, we might be able to talk about 8-4. But damn, my floor this year is 10-2. I think that's the most realistic possibility, not even trying to predict injuries or significant things to happen. I think when you look at the schedule, which I will pull up here in a moment, 10-2 is the floor. Am I wrong?
9-3 would be the floor.
Ooh.
I mean, there are at minimum 3 real teams that they play that they could lose to on any given Saturday. I'm not saying that they will. Worst case scenario, there's 3 games they could lose.
Now, is Clemson one of those teams?
Hell no.
What are the 3 teams? And I don't disagree with you. I think Georgia's going to beat Clemson. I don't know if they're going to steamroll Clemson, but I think they're going to beat Clemson.
I mean, the 3 most likely are the usual suspects. I think you got Alabama, Texas, Ole Miss, right? Would probably be the 3 candidates to be the most likely. But I mean, there are scenarios where Georgia could possibly lose to a Tennessee, or I mean, if Florida played the game of their lives. I mean, they're real teams. You know what I mean? Like, so, like, I mean, hell, Georgia Tech could. I mean, Haynes King is a real quarterback, guys. I mean, I think Georgia Tech's going to beat Florida State outright. How's that for a hot take?
11.5-point dog too.
Yeah, I think Georgia Tech's going to win that football game. But I mean, right. If everything goes normal, I think you're right. 10-2 would be the expected low floor. But I mean, 9-3 is the worst I could see them doing. According to NCAA 25, they're going to go 2-10. So, I mean,
hey,
buckle up, boys.
God, I don't even want to imagine what would happen on Twitter if they went 2-10. I don't even want to think about it. So, Dan, let's go ahead and pull up the schedule so I don't have to think about it. We got it. I zoomed in. I don't know how much is I. Let me come back to the screen. Okay, we can see all 12 games. Dan, let's start at number 1. Clemson, Georgia, number 1, number 14, noon, ABC kick. I don't even need to ask. I think you start out the gate 2-0. My really one question here with the first 2 games is, what Georgia team do you see week 1? Is it the world beater, the we are hunting team, or is it kind of, your typical maybe week 1 slop you out of the gate, but you get it done after 4 quarters of play?
What I'm expecting to see is a as healthy as you're going to get Georgia football team. That's ready to play, that's had an entire offseason to plan for this game. I love a front-loaded schedule where your first game of the year is a real game. For whatever reason, I always feel like that makes you have a better offseason because you have to be ready to play week 1. I think, I mean, just my opinion, I think that you're going to see a really focused and ready to go Georgia football team on August 31st.
I'm with you on that. I think they're going to be ready to go. I don't know if they're going to go out here and beat them what they did, like they did Oregon the other year. We'll see on that. Obviously, Georgia lost a lot of talent the year before too, but came back and played with a chipper in their shoulder that whole year. I'm really curious to see how this team plays in week 1. Tennessee Tech at home. Not going to say much there. Dan, interesting. Week 3 on the road at Kentucky. I love that this game's in September because there's
thank God.
Yeah. Because I couldn't imagine having to go to, I think it's is it Kroger Field? Kroger Field out there in Kentucky in November. That looks miserable, and by all accounts, is miserable.
The other thing is, I did not realize how far away that is. Like when we drove to Indiana for Cannons basketball, and we drove by, through Lexington or up that way. Holy hell, that is a long way away. I mean, didn't Jonathan and Jeremiah, didn't they drive it?
I think they were at that game. At least one of them was at that game. So
that's wild. That is so far away.
Yeah. I've seen some people put this as a trap game, and I see where they're getting at here, but I don't think Kirby Smart's going to allow that team to walk in there thinking they're just going to walk over Kentucky, because I think the players know just as well as Kirby does that's going to be a dogfight in the sense of, hey, Kentucky's going to look to hit you as hard as they can for 4 quarters. Georgia's going to get the win,
There's going to be a redheaded, bearded caveman that's trying to beat the hell out of you. So good luck, Brock. But I think it's going to be an ugly game, but I think Georgia wins. You're right.
Week 5, or actually 6, because there's a bye week in between these. Dan, or no, it is week 5. I'm sorry. At Alabama, the first SEC home game at Nick Saban Field, or I guess that's what they're going to call it, Nick Saban Field. This one's interesting. Kalen DeBoer, new head coach, new offense. Supposedly, we're supposed to see the best version of Jalen Milroe, although I don't think he will ever play as well as he did against Georgia last year. Granted, I don't think he was as efficient throwing the football in that game, so there is room to grow. But he played his best football game last year in the SEC title game. Dan, this is one of those potential losses here. Does Georgia get it done in Tuscaloosa?
I would feel much better if this game was earlier in the season, because I have a feeling they're going to be able to work out some kinks. This will be a really competitive game. I think this is a game that Georgia can win. I think this is a game that Georgia needs to win. I understand that they have beaten Nick Saban the one time, but Nick Saban's gone. This is an opportunity to kind of put your foot on their throat and be like, no, your time has passed and it's my time now. And you can't beat me anymore. And you don't scare me anymore. And you're not the bad guy anymore. And I think it's an important game. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe people have a different opinion. That's just my opinion on this game. I think this is a very important game for Georgia that they need to win.
It's definitely a get the monkey off your back thing, because I imagine the noise in that building, or the noise outside the building, because the noise inside the building's none. It's like a desert out there. You don't hear anything. The only thing you hear is Kirby Smart on that microphone letting you have it at practice if you didn't run the right route. Outside the building, there's been a lot of talk of, well, can Kirby, does his problems facing Saban, which greatest coach of all time, go away now that he's facing Kalen DeBoer? I'm really intrigued to see that matchup. I'm also really intrigued to see how Kalen DeBoer brings that offense over from Washington, because from the games I watched Washington play last year, Michael Penix balled out. Michael Penix was probably one of the most accurate throwers that I had watched, especially on the deep ball against Texas. Man put the biscuit in the basket, as Gus Johnson has said previously in the past, consistently. Can Jalen Milroe do that? Is that how Kalen DeBoer needs his quarterback to play to win? We'll see. Dan, next. Auburn. At home. There is no Prayer and Jordan Hare type, magic over here in Sanford Stadium. Hugh Freeze gave Georgia a really good shot last year. 4th quarter game. Brock Bowers went out there, won it for you. Then I think, was it Bullard? I think it was Bullard that got the pick to seal it at the end. Is this game this close again, or does Georgia go out here and dominate week after playing Bama?
Classic letdown game. And here's the thing, Harrison. This is why I hate doing schedules like this, right? Because Georgia has more talent than every team on this list. But it's a schedule and it plays out, and they're humans that play the game. There's nicks and bruises and small injuries, and there's 18 to 22-year-olds who, if you've ever been around an 18 to 22-year-old, I'm looking at this guy right here, how they feel from one moment to another, you have no idea. So, I mean, this is a game Georgia's supposed to win, but it could be a competitive football game.
Yeah, it's tough because I'm not going to give point spreads. We'll just say whether we feel it's decisive or whatever. I don't want to give point spreads because that's going to get messy, and we're certain to be wrong on pretty much all of these. Next week, Mississippi State. I think after 2 back-to-back, what you can consider rivalry games, it's going to feel nice, mighty nice to have the fellow Bulldogs come into town. I think Georgia rolls them. I do. I'm just going to go ahead and put it out there. I think this is probably Georgia's biggest margin of victory in the SEC this year.
Auburn.
No, Mississippi State. I think.
You,
yeah. I think Mississippi State will be the biggest margin of victory because you don't have Vandy on the schedule this year. I think Mississippi State's just going to be the victim of the beatdown, especially if maybe you come off a poor performance against Auburn. Then yeah, I could see a get back game over there against Mississippi State. Dan, anything you want to add before we move on to second biggest game, first biggest game, however you want to argue it?
No, I think you're right. Mississippi State should be a beatdown.
At Texas, baby. In Austin. I think the boys will be there. I'm hoping all of us will be there. We'll see. It's a hard place to get into right now, which is crazy considering they have the F1 event going on this weekend. I think Eminem is supposed to be having a performance this weekend as well. So the deck is stacked against Georgia fans in terms of trying to fill up that stadium. Dan, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think DKR even reaches the top 5 in terms of hard environments that Georgia has played in the Kirby Smart era. I haven't seen it. And maybe it's because they haven't been back. Like Texas is back. I think South Bend beats out Texas in terms of environment. Maybe I'm wrong. What do you say?
Well, South Bend is not a hostile environment. They are extremely kind and nice up there, and it gets kind of loud, but it's nothing like an SEC environment. I think Georgia's going to do a really good job of filling up that stadium. They've made a point to do it in the past. There are ways to get there. I will enjoy that game on television. There's no way in hell I'm trying to go into Austin that weekend. And I don't like Austin. I'll raise my hand. I am not one of the. There's so many homeless people, and it's like dirt. Their whole thing is keep Austin weird. Yeah, it's weird. It's whatever. But this is the game that I have scheduled on circled on the schedule. I think if Georgia loses a game, this is the one they're losing. And I'm not saying because I think Texas is better. I just think Texas is going to be really excited to play this football game. It is in their place. I don't know, man. I don't know what it is. I mean, I hope Georgia goes 12-0, but this is the one that I have scheduled. This is the one that I'm like, damn, that's going to be a game.
Say what you want about who won the SEC last year. Texas doesn't play Alabama. But the next best team in terms of last year and really the best team over the last 3 years has been Georgia. So, yeah, there is a target on their back, whether they're the reigning SEC champions or the reigning national champions. Texas is coming for them. And I won't come out here and say Georgia won't be ready for that game because I'm sure they will. It's just a matter of, how does the defense play against probably one of the best, if not the best, offensive lines they'll face all year. This is a potential playoff preview of sorts. It's definitely a potential SEC championship preview, which in my case, Dan, if Georgia's going to lose a game against these guys, lose the first one, but go win the last one is my philosophy. And I think that's everybody's philosophy. Obviously, if you're going to play them 3 times, you want to beat them all 3 times because that's great. But Dan, I'm going to go out here and I'm going to put it, if Georgia's losing a game, this is it. So we'll move on to Florida coming off a loss. You have a bye week in between. So you get like 14 days almost to kind of like let that sit and let that loss, register in your mind and in your heart, which means, Dan, hot take of the night on my end, Georgia's going to go in there and whoop some Gator butt down there in Jacksonville. It will not be a long ride home from Jacksonville because it's going to be a happy ride home from Jacksonville. I think coming off the loss to Texas, Florida going to catch a beat down, may or may not get Billy Napier fired.
That was going to be my question. Is this the game that gets Billy Napier fired?
Dan Mullen says so. Actually, no. It was McElwain. I think it was McElwain that got fired after the Georgia game. I think maybe Mullen did. I forget. He got fired maybe a week or 2 after the Georgia game.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that's That's the beginning of the that run that Florida's about to go on. That's just hellacious.
Yeah. Georgia, if they come off a loss, I think you smoke Florida. Heck, even without the loss, nobody hates Florida more than Kirby Smart does. I'm not afraid that they lose that game. I think they're going to win that game. Although my friend Dan will tell me, don't ever underestimate the Gators. I think Georgia goes in there, smacks them, then comes back home. Goes on the road again to Ole Miss, Vaught Hemingway Stadium. Dan, this is another kind of favorite pick of if Georgia's going to lose. This is one of them. Me personally, I'm not buying the Ole Miss stock. I get it. They're at home. I get it. Vaught Hemingway is probably going to be electric atmosphere. I get it. Lane Kiffin's going to throw the proverbial textbook over to the sideline at Georgia. I think Georgia has the depth. I think Georgia has the talent, even with Lane Kiffin's Portal King mantra over there. Georgia goes into Vaught Hemingway, escapes with a win. I don't know if it will be as wide of a margin of victory as it was last year at home, but I will say I think it's going to be a 2-touchdown at the least win.
And that is a game that my son wants to go to. He has fallen in love with Ole Miss for whatever reason. And he's like, hey, do you think we could go to that game? I'm like, probably not. Probably not, but maybe. That'd be a hell of a football game.
It's going to be a heck of a football. I'm excited to watch that game. Seeing Kirby and Kiffin kind of go out, it's always fun. We haven't got it much, which makes kind of 2 back-to-back years of having to play each other even more special. Coming up next, a team that Georgia knows all too well, and another common, team that people say, hey, if Georgia's going to lose, it's going to be this team. Well, I'm just going to go ahead and tell you, I don't see Tennessee walking into Athens and coming out with a win. I think Tennessee is an improved team from last year. I think their defense gets a little bit better. I think their offense by this time of the year is probably going to be as good as it's going to get for the season, but I don't think it's going to be enough. Sanford is going to be rocking. Maybe not as much as it was when they were the number 1 team coming into town, but it's going to be a heck of an atmosphere. This is the third to last home game, and it's really, in my opinion, going to be the last true home game in the sense of everybody is going to want to have a ticket to see Tennessee face off with Georgia. I think Georgia wins this kind of in the same way they've won it over the last 2 years. Maybe Tennessee, they survive the early surge from Tennessee, but then they stomp them out come the second half.
For all we know, Tennessee might be a top 5 team when we play them. We have no idea how the season is going to play out. We don't really know what to expect out of Tennessee. That's one of those teams that could go either way. They could be really, really good, or they could just fall flat on their face. So I think it's either way. I think it's going to be a good game. It just Georgia, Tennessee typically are good games across the board. But you're right. Georgia should get that W, and then we don't even need to touch on UMass, because if Georgia loses to UMass, I'm selling my house and moving to North Dakota.
Hey, I'm with them. Georgia Tech. Georgia should win this game. It's on a Friday night. How do we feel about that? Georgia on a Friday night.
That could be a sneaky good game, and I guarantee it. The coaches are going to be pissed off that it's on a Friday night because they can't go watch high school football. And recruiting is the most important thing. So,
yeah. Well, and I also think about this: their schedule is going to get shifted up pretty much a whole day. So Bloody Tuesday is going to be Bloody Monday that week there for Georgia. I'm curious to see how they handle that. I don't know how they feel about that. Obviously, for maybe the coaches, it's nice to have that Saturday off following the game. They can spend the Saturday with their family on Thanksgiving weekend. Georgia should beat Georgia Tech. Given the way they played Georgia last year, I don't know if this is going to be a complete Georgia beatdown. Georgia did not play its cleanest game against Tech. It probably played one of its worst games of the season, minus Alabama, versus Georgia Tech last year. But in my opinion, Georgia wins. Dan, I got Georgia going 11-1. Possibly 11-2 or 10-2. It's tough to say. The margin's slim.
Listen, you have the one hand where Georgia's the best team in the country and they should win every single game. Then you have the other hand where you're like, we're humans and stuff happens. For some reason, 10-2 is just in my head, but I'm going to just go 11-1 with you. I'll ride with that 11-1. I want it to be 12-0 so bad, because if they go 12-0 with that schedule, that regular
best team of all time,
bro, come on. I mean, come on, that's legit.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, honestly, Dale Dan, as speaking as somebody who's watched Georgia for a long time, I'd be halfway terrified that if they went 12-0, they'd somehow manage find a way to mess it up in the playoff.
Yeah, well,
That'd be my
if you're scared by a dog,
there it is. There it is. If you're scared by a dog, we clipped that a few weeks back. If you're scared by a dog, as Dan Clyde once said, Dan, week 0. The slate, as you said, is probably one of the better week 0 slates we've had. Let's kick it off with the noon, or actually it's 11 o'clock kick. Florida State, Georgia Tech. Let me hear the reasons here, Dan. Why are we going with the 11.5-point dog in Ireland?
Florida State's basically having to put together a whole brand new team, and I know they went and got a lot of guys out of the transfer portal, but they're not. And like DJU, like DJU hasn't been special anywhere he's been. Like he was supposed to be, but he's not. Haynes King is a real quarterback who can play. He can freaking play. He can spin it, and Buster has done a really good job with that offense. He's getting the most out of him. Brent Key has kind of made 680 The Fan his freaking home lately. He's on there like every other day because Joe Hamilton's on there. So I have to hear the guy talk all the time. And speaking, completely sidebar here. We were talking about these coaches that have that that attitude, like dickhead attitude almost. Like, bro, you haven't done anything. Calm down. Like you don't have the right to be surly or whatever the word is. Like you should just be happy that you have a head coaching job. Anyway, I think Georgia Tech has a real good chance to beat Florida State, and I'm pulling. I honestly, God, I'm pulling for them to do it.
Damn. So has Florida State just gotten that under the skin this offseason?
Their fans are yes, and I have a ton of Florida State fans that are friends. Some that I love very dearly, but and they're not the problem. It's the rest of them.
It's the rest of them. I won't go. I would love to see Georgia Tech pull the upset. I think it's definitely possible. I think it's more possible than it's ever been in terms of these two teams matching up here recently. In terms of how this game plays out, Florida State is the 11.5-point favorite. I'm not going to go as far as Dan. I'm going to let Dan stand alone on his hot take here. But I will say, I think Georgia Tech covers. I really like what I saw from Haynes King last year against Georgia. They lost Brett Seether. Now, whether or not they can replace Brett Seether, I don't know how special Brett Seether was to the game plan last year offensively. I don't think it has a big impact, but it could. We'll see. But yeah, I'll go Georgia Tech to cover. I think we're going to see two football teams. They're going to try and run the rock. Now, who's more successful doing that? I'd have to lean Florida State, but you never know. Buster schemed one up. Buster did a really good job against Georgia last year, which I think is giving many people confidence that he can pull off the upset against the Seminoles. Dan, I think I was looking at the schedule. Florida, Miami are week 1. ESPN surprisingly doesn't have any. They have Florida State, Georgia Tech listed on here, but it doesn't look like they ever. Oh, here we go. The other games. Yeah, I mean, good luck. SMU at Nevada. I don't know. Tickets are going for $12. Nobody knows what that scoreline is going to be. Montana State, New Mexico beats me. Delaware State, Hawaii. I'm going to lean Hawaii in this one just because of what Georgia did to them at the Sugar Bowl back in 2007. Yeah, so we got one marquee game starting at noon, which is interesting, really interesting. But the day ends. Day doesn't even end until after midnight. Hawaii and Delaware State kick off at 11:59. That is a weird kickoff time. Now I see that time a lot being in school. 11:59 is a popular due time, but in terms of football kickoffs, that's weird.
I got duped. You're right. Those are all week 1 games. I apologize.
You're good. Hey, I wish we had Miami, Florida this week because it'd make the slate even better, especially considering the marquee game or what's supposed to be the marquee games kicking off at noon. I would love to have that be in the 8 o'clock slot, Miami versus Florida.
It's in Dublin, Ireland, so it's like probably 8 o'clock.
That's why they're kicking off. Yeah. But, hey, what I did see, which is interesting, Kirk in game day, which is not interesting because you had to know they were going out there. I don't think Kirk and Fowler Chris Fowler are calling a game this weekend because they're out in Dublin. They're not calling the Georgia Tech game because I saw that was going to Palmer's crew, which is interesting to me. You're not going to put your big game day crew out there, especially considering they're already out there doing game day. Dan, I think that wraps it up for this week's edition of the Top podcast. As I said earlier, make sure you like, subscribe, rate us 5 stars. This is the college football show that you want to be with us every single week. We are live on Tuesdays at 7:30, unless otherwise stated. This week, we just had a few things pop up on Tuesdays, preventing us from doing it. But hey, we'll be back here next week, Tuesday. It is game week next week. So we are going Clemson, Georgia preview. We have not spoken about Clemson much outside of tonight, so I'm interested to kind of get some thoughts there. Should be a good game. It feels like 2021 again, just because we're kicking off with Clemson in week 1. But I will say this, as Dan said earlier to start the show, it feels great to have a marquee matchup week 1, because by God, was it tough having to talk about who they played last. I don't even remember who they played last year, but it was not a good game. Not a good game. And it was like 7:30 kick too. You wait all day for them to play some Pee-wee team that they ended up blowing out. But 7:30.
Look at it this way: the next time you see our faces, there will have been real football played that counts, and we will be 5 days away, 4 days away from Georgia kicking off. So next Tuesday at 7:30, make sure you tune in, because I'm going to do my homework and I'm going to make sure that I'm up to date on everything that's happening with this Georgia football team, and make sure we know who's in, who's out, how that may or may not affect the team. We should know everything that we're supposed to know by that point, and we will have real football, guys. Real football. Speaking of real football, Mill Creek's 1-0. Let's go.
Hey, we might have to make a new segment because we're both going to be on the road for Friday nights. I may even be with Dan for a Friday night over at Mill Creek's game here in like the next week or two. Let's come back and get some takeaways, maybe a little like athlete of the week edition type stuff. Shout somebody out on the show that we saw this weekend. Shout out to high school football, man. It felt good. First high school football game of the year for me last Friday. First one since I went to your place for Buford Mill Creek, the best high school football game I've ever seen. It was great to be back. And it reminds me, Dan, it's nothing's more special than seeing at that stage, because that's really where, as a journalist, you can kind of help make the most impact, because those kids have a chance to go off and do everything they can afterward.
Well, all right, if we're going to do that, then let me say this. One of the best things about watching high school football is specifically if you know the kids, right? So, at Mill Creek, it's a really, really big school, and they've been really successful the last couple of years. And there are a lot of kids who are really good at football that just really had to wait their turn. So I'm going to give a shout out to 2 kids from Mill Creek's football team that had to wait their turn, and they made the most out of it. The first one is the running back named Daniel Smith, who wears number 7. If you ever paid attention to Mill Creek, the kid is a phenomenal running back, and he did a great job. He had 196 yards on the ground. Made some really big plays, made some really tough plays, had a fabulous football game. And then there's another guy, his name is Connor Faber, and I've known that one. I've known both of them since they were real little. He's one of the guys that's kind of been in line waiting his turn, and then had to deal with some injuries as well. Finally got an opportunity to play. Very first play of the game, gets a scoop 6, scores a touchdown on a recovered fumble. Gets another recovered fumble later in the football game, and I believe he had 2, if not 3 sacks as well. Kid finally getting his opportunity to play, makes the most out of it. As a person in the community, as a guy who just loves high school football, I was really excited for those 2 young men, and they made the most out of the first game. So we'll see who is the star next week and who does a great job next week, but those 2 really stood out week 1.
Hey, always be ready. Always stay ready. You never know when you're going to get your shot. I heard a quote this week, and I want to make sure that I keep it in the mind. The harder you work, the luckier you get. So,
of course,
in any path, the harder you work, the luckier you get. Really great quote. Hey, and that's how we're going to wrap up the Top podcast, episode 122. College football's back. Football's back, period. We'll see you next week for game week. Georgia, Clemson, Saturday at noon. We will have the Top Dog Talk Tuesday at 7:30. Go follow Dan Kiley at DanKiley3 on Twitter. Follow me at Harrison Marino. We'll see you next week.
Go Dogs!